The first time I suspected my husband was hiding something from me, he was standing beside my father's grave. It wasn't anything he said. It was the way he looked at my sister. The glance lasted no more than a second, maybe less. A quick meeting of their eyes across a row of black umbrellas, followed by the smallest nod from my husband. If I had seen it anywhere else, I might not have noticed. But grief has a strange way of sharpening certain details while blurring everything else. I don't remember what the minister said that afternoon. I don't remember who brought the white roses, or which neighbor held my arm when my knees weakened, but I remember that look. And I remember thinking, even then, that it didn't belong at my father's funeral. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 41 years old when my father died, and until that week, I believed I understood the people closest to me. I had been married to Daniel Morgan for 17 years. My younger sister, Vanessa, had been my best friend for almost twice that long. And my father, Walter Bennett, had been the one person in my life whose love I had never needed to question. Dad owned Bennett Millworks, a custom woodworking company outside Asheville, North Carolina. He had started it in a rented garage with 2 secondhand saws and a truck that stalled every time it rained. By the time I was in high school, the company employed 12 people. By the time I was married, it had grown into one of the most respected architectural woodworking businesses in the region. Dad never became flashy. He still wore the same brown work boots until the soles separated. He still brought lunch from home in an old green cooler. He still sharpened pencils with a pocket knife even after we bought him an electric sharpener for Christmas. He believed that the things people used every day should be made carefully. Tables, doors, staircases, promises. Anything worth keeping, he used to tell me, ought to be built to survive pressure. At the time I thought he was talking about wood. Looking back, I think he was trying to warn me. I worked as the operations manager at Bennett Millworks. Dad handled clients and design. I handled schedules, payroll, vendors, and the 1,000 small emergencies that could turn an ordinary Tuesday into a disaster. Vanessa had never wanted anything to do with the business. She was 3 years younger than me and had always been drawn to brighter things. Event planning, boutique openings, charity luncheons, rooms where people wore clothing too expensive to spill anything on. There was nothing wrong with that. At least, that was what I told myself whenever Dad compared us. Rachel understands responsibility, he once said after Vanessa missed another family dinner. He hadn't meant it cruelly. Vanessa still heard it that way. She had spent most of her life believing Dad respected me more. I had spent most of mine trying to convince her that being depended on wasn't the same as being loved more. Daniel understood that tension better than anyone. Or I thought he did. He had met Vanessa before he met me. They attended the same college for one semester, though neither of them mentioned it until after our 3rd date. It was barely anything, Daniel had said when I asked. Vanessa laughed. He helped me pass statistics. I helped you cheat at statistics, he corrected. They had smiled at each other with the comfortable familiarity of people sharing an old joke. I remember smiling too. That was the kind of wife I was then. I believed trust meant refusing to examine harmless things too closely. Daniel worked in commercial real estate. He was charming without being loud, confident without seeming arrogant, and very good at making people feel as though their ideas had been his ideas all along. When we first married, I thought that quality made him diplomatic. Later, I understood it made him dangerous. Still, for most of our marriage, we were happy in all the ordinary ways that matter. Coffee together before work, Sunday dinners at Dad's house, arguments about whether the thermostat belonged at 68 or 70. Daniel knew I hated driving in heavy rain, so he always called when storms were coming. I knew he forgot every birthday that wasn't saved in his phone, so I reminded him without making him feel guilty. We built a life from thousands of small accommodations. I mistook that for permanence. Dad's death came quickly. He had been tired for months, but he blamed age and work. Then, one Thursday morning, he collapsed beside the drafting table he had used since 1998. The doctors found advanced pancreatic cancer. He lived another 11 weeks. During those weeks, I drove him to every appointment. I cooked meals he barely touched. I slept in the guest room of his house because he refused to move in with us, and I refused to leave him alone. Daniel was supportive at first. He brought groceries. He spoke with the nurses. He handled calls from clients when I couldn't. Vanessa visited too, though never for long. She would arrive wearing perfume Dad said was too strong, sit beside his bed and talk about childhood vacations as if memory alone could make him well. Dad was gentle with her. He was always gentler with Vanessa when she was afraid. 3 nights before he died, he asked to speak with me alone. The house was quiet except for the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His hands, once strong enough to carry oak cabinet doors by himself, rested loosely on top of the blanket. "Did Daniel come by today?" he asked. I adjusted the cup of water on his nightstand. "He had a meeting in Charlotte." Dad watched me for a moment. "Did he tell you that?" The question unsettled me. "Yes." He looked toward the window. Rain moved slowly down the glass. "And Vanessa? She was here this morning." "I know." His voice had changed. Not weaker, more careful. I sat down beside him. "What's wrong?" Dad's fingers moved toward the nightstand drawer, then stopped. "Rachel, there are things I should have told you sooner." I waited. He took a shallow breath. "You've spent your whole life keeping this family together. Dad, let me finish." His voice was soft, but I recognized the tone. It was the same one he used when a machine was dangerous and someone needed to step back. "You believe being loyal means giving people the benefit of the doubt." I looked down at my hands. "Most of the time, it does." "No." He shook his head. "Sometimes loyalty means being brave enough to see what's in front of you." I tried to smile. "You're scaring me." "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the drawer and removed a small brass key. It was old, darkened around the edges, with a strip of faded red thread tied through the top. I had seen it before. Dad kept a locked cabinet in the back of his workshop. As children, Vanessa and I had been told never to touch it. I assumed it held business records, old contracts, maybe insurance documents. He placed the key in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "After I'm gone, go to the workshop alone." My throat tightened. "Dad, don't talk like that." "Alone, Rachel." He held my hand with what little strength he had left. "Don't tell Daniel. Don't tell Vanessa. Not until you understand what you find." I stared at him. What am I going to find? His eyes filled with something I couldn't identify then. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "I made changes," he whispered. "Changes I should have made years ago." A sound came from the hallway. The floorboard outside the bedroom creaked. Dad released my hand. A second later, Vanessa appeared in the doorway holding a paper bag from the bakery downtown. She looked from Dad to me. "What are you two whispering about?" "Nothing," I said too quickly. Her eyes dropped to my closed fist. Then Daniel stepped into view behind her. I hadn't heard his car. He rested one hand on Vanessa's shoulder as he moved past her, a gesture so natural that I almost missed it. Almost. "I thought you had a meeting in Charlotte," I said. Daniel didn't hesitate. It ended early. He kissed my forehead. Then he looked at my father. For the first time in 17 years, I saw something cold pass between the two men. Dad turned his face toward the window. Daniel smiled as though nothing had happened, and I kept the brass key hidden in my hand. Dad died 3 days later. After the funeral, our family gathered at his house. Neighbors filled the kitchen with casseroles, pies, and more coffee than anyone could drink. People told stories about Dad repairing church pews for free and building a wheelchair ramp overnight for a retired teacher. Vanessa cried openly. Daniel stayed close to her. I noticed that. I hated myself for noticing. At some point, Dad's attorney, Samuel Price, approached me near the back porch. Samuel was almost 70, with silver hair and the cautious expression of a man who never spoke before, deciding exactly how much truth a room could handle. "The formal reading will be Friday," he said. I nodded. "Rachel, did your father give you anything before he passed?" The brass key felt heavy inside the pocket of my coat. I looked across the room. Daniel was speaking quietly to Vanessa near the fireplace. Vanessa touched his wrist. He lowered his voice. Neither of them saw me watching. "No," I told Samuel. It was the first lie I had ever told my father's attorney. Samuel studied my face. Then he gave one slow nod. "Be careful who you trust this week." Before I could ask what he meant, Daniel appeared beside me. "There you are," he said, slipping an arm around my waist. Samuel's expression changed immediately. "Professional? Blank." Daniel looked at him. "Everything straightforward with the estate?" "That will be discussed Friday." "Of course." Daniel smiled, but his arm tightened around me. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at Dad's kitchen table. His coffee mug was still beside the sink. His reading glasses rested on yesterday's newspaper. The house seemed to be waiting for him to return from the workshop. Daniel had offered to stay, but I told him I wanted one night alone. He resisted. Not enough to seem suspicious, just enough to make me certain I had made the right decision. At 11:30, I put on Dad's old canvas jacket, took a flashlight from the pantry, and walked across the yard. The workshop stood behind the house beneath 2 tall maple trees. Dad had spent more hours inside that building than anywhere else on Earth. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of cedar and machine oil wrapped around me. For 1 second, I expected to hear him call my name. The silence that answered nearly sent me back outside. Instead, I turned on the lights. The locked cabinet stood behind his drafting table. I removed the brass key. My hand shook as I pushed it into the lock. Inside the cabinet were 4 file boxes, a digital recorder, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Dad's uneven handwriting. I opened the envelope first. There was only 1 page inside. "Rachel, if you are reading this, I did not have enough time to explain. Do not sign anything Daniel gives you. Do not allow Vanessa access to the company accounts. They believe the original trust is still valid. It is not. Everything you need is in these boxes. Forgive me for seeing the truth too late." Dad, I read the letter twice, then a 3rd time. My knees weakened, and I lowered myself into his wooden chair. They believe the original trust is still valid. Daniel, Vanessa. Together. A car door closed outside the workshop. I switched off the desk lamp. Through the dusty front window, I saw headlights disappear, footsteps crossed the gravel. Someone tried the workshop door. Locked. A shadow moved behind the glass. Then my husband's voice came from the other side. "Rachel?" He paused. The door handle turned again. "Are you in there?" I held my father's letter against my chest and didn't make a sound. Because for the first time in 17 years, I was afraid of what my husband might do if he knew I had found the truth. I stayed perfectly still. The letter trembled in my hands while Daniel stood only a few feet away on the other side of the workshop door. "Rachel?" He called again. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people use when they've already decided how a conversation is supposed to end. I didn't answer. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard his footsteps moving around the outside of the building. He checked the windows, the back entrance, even the old loading door Dad hadn't used in years. My heartbeat settled into an uncomfortable rhythm. Daniel wasn't looking for me. He was looking for something. Eventually, the footsteps faded. A car engine started. Only after the headlights disappeared down the gravel driveway did I finally allow myself to breathe. I locked the workshop from the inside again before returning to the cabinet. Dad had left 4 storage boxes. Each one was carefully labeled: business, trust, personal, if everything else fails. That last label sent a chill through me. Dad had never been dramatic. If he had written those words, he had expected something to go terribly wrong. I opened the first box. Every folder had dates. Every document had handwritten notes in the margins. It wasn't the work of someone preparing for retirement. It was the work of someone documenting a betrayal. The first file contained copies of property deeds. The second held revised trust agreements. The third contained letters between Dad and his attorney stretching back nearly 4 years. I recognized Samuel Price's signature immediately. One sentence had been highlighted in yellow. I strongly advise that no member of your family be informed until the revisions are legally irreversible. I read it twice. Irreversible. Dad hadn't simply updated paperwork. He had been protecting it from someone or several people. The next folder held financial statements. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Annual reports, equipment purchases, payroll summaries. Then I noticed a name that didn't belong. Morgan Development Holdings. Daniel's company. I frowned. There were payments from Bennett Millworks to Morgan Development going back almost 3 years. Consulting fees, property evaluations, development assessments, nearly $400,000 altogether. I searched my memory. We had never hired Daniel's company, not once. I flipped through the invoices. Every signature approving payment belonged to my father. Except they didn't. I knew Dad's handwriting better than my own. These signatures copied the shape of his name, but not the pressure, not the rhythm. The capital W always leaned slightly forward. These leaned backward. Someone had practiced, someone had gotten close, but they hadn't fooled the daughter who had watched that signature appear on birthday cards, report cards, loan applications, and thousands of paychecks. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I continued. The second box explained why. Dad had quietly transferred ownership of Bennett Millworks into a protected family trust 6 months earlier. Not because he planned to sell, because he believed someone intended to take it. His handwritten notes filled the margins. Daniel asked unusual questions about succession. Vanessa requested access to financial statements she never cared about before. Trust your instincts, Walter. The words looked rushed, as though he had been writing reminders to himself. I sat back in Dad's chair. A memory surfaced without warning. Almost a year earlier, Daniel had casually asked whether Dad intended to retire soon. At the time, I thought he was making conversation. Now I remembered something else. He hadn't asked me. He had asked Dad directly. And Vanessa had been sitting beside him, watching, listening. Neither of them had said much afterward. They hadn't needed to. Looking back, the conversation suddenly had a purpose. I closed my eyes. How many moments had I misunderstood simply because I trusted the people living inside them? The third box answered that question. It held photographs, not personal photographs, evidence. Dad had printed security camera stills from the office, Daniel entering the accounting department after hours, Vanessa leaving with folders she had no business handling, bank envelopes disappearing into briefcases, late-night meetings in the conference room. The timestamps stretched back almost 2 years. Dad hadn't confronted anyone. He had watched, documented, prepared. Inside one envelope, I found a small notebook. It was Dad's. He had written dates, observations, questions. One page stopped me cold. March the 14th, walked into conference room unexpectedly. Daniel and Vanessa stopped talking immediately. She looked frightened. He smiled too quickly. Something is wrong. The next entry came 6 weeks later. April 28th. Asked Daniel why he wanted copies of trust documents. He said curiosity. Didn't believe him. Another. June 2nd. Rachel still trusts them. Need proof before I tell her. Tears finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent drops landing on paper my father had written while carrying a burden he refused to place on my shoulders until he had certainty. I'm sorry, I whispered into the empty workshop. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. The room answered with silence. I wiped my face and reached for the final box. The one labeled, "If everything else fails." Inside was a digital recorder, a sealed flash drive, and another envelope. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Samuel Price. I hesitated before opening it. Dad had underlined one sentence across the front. Only if Rachel already knows the truth. With careful fingers, I unfolded the letter. Samuel, if Rachel is reading this, then events unfolded exactly as I feared. The documents alone may not be enough. People willing to forge signatures are often willing to invent explanations. That is why I recorded everything. The recorder contains conversations I was never meant to hear. Do not play them unless absolutely necessary. If Daniel discovers these recordings before Rachel does, everything I protected may disappear. I looked at the recorder lying quietly beside the letter. My hands suddenly felt cold. Dad had recorded conversations. Between whom? Daniel? Vanessa? Both. A vibration broke the silence. My phone. Daniel. Calling. I stared at the screen until it stopped. A text arrived seconds later. Where are you? Another followed. Samuel called. We need to discuss Friday's meeting. Then another. Please answer. I'm worried. I almost laughed. Worried. Not once during 17 years had Daniel sent 3 texts in under 5 minutes. Not when I traveled for work. Not when my flights were delayed. Not when I spent nights caring for Dad in the hospital. Tonight, he suddenly couldn't stop checking where I was, because he didn't know what I had found. I slipped the flash drive into my purse. The recorder followed. Then I removed only the documents I considered essential. The rest stayed exactly where Dad had left them. If Daniel returned looking for evidence, I wanted him to believe nothing had been touched. Before leaving, I stood in the center of the workshop one last time. The old drafting table, the clamps hanging neatly on the wall, the shelves filled with wood samples Dad refused to throw away because good walnut deserves another chance. Every corner of the room still felt like him, strong, patient, prepared. He had spent the last years of his life protecting me without my knowledge. Now it was my turn to protect what he had built. When I reached the house, Daniel's SUV was parked outside. The porch light was on. He opened the front door before I reached the steps. "There you are." His smile appeared almost instantly. Too quickly. "I've been calling. My phone was on silent. I was worried." "Were you?" His expression flickered for only a fraction of a second. "You've had a difficult week." "I wanted to be alone. I could have come with you." "I know." His eyes drifted briefly toward the dark outline of the workshop. "You went over there?" I needed to feel close to Dad. He studied my face carefully. "Did you find anything?" The question landed between us like broken glass. "Not." "How are you?" "Not." "Are you okay?" His first real question was about what I had found. I smiled gently. Just memories. For the first time since I'd known him. Daniel looked disappointed. He hid it almost immediately. Almost. Later that night, after he fell asleep beside me, I slipped quietly out of bed. I carried the digital recorder into the guest room. I closed the door, pressed play. Static filled the room. Then my father's voice. Calm. Measured. "Testing, July 12th. A chair scraped across the floor. Another voice answered, one I recognized instantly. "Daniel." I don't think Rachel suspects anything. Every muscle in my body froze. Then Vanessa laughed softly. "No," she said. "She never does." And in that moment, I realized my father's documents had only revealed half the betrayal. The recordings were about to expose the rest. I couldn't move. The recorder rested on the guest room desk, its tiny red light glowing in the darkness while my father's careful planning reached across time. Daniel's voice came through the speaker again. "I don't think Rachel suspects anything." Vanessa laughed, softly, comfortably. The kind of laugh people share after repeating the same lie so many times that it no longer feels like one. "No," she said. "She never does." Silence followed. Not empty silence. The silence of three people sitting in the same room, each measuring what to say next. Then my father's voice. "You wanted to discuss the company's future." Daniel answered first. "That's right." "And Rachel? What about her?" A pause. "She's your daughter." Another pause. Then Daniel sighed. "Rachel is wonderful, Walter." Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, the word "but" is already there, invisible, waiting. But she's too emotional to run the company alone. I stared at the recorder. Too emotional? I'd spent nearly 20 years managing production schedules, negotiating supplier contracts, solving payroll crises, and keeping Bennett Millworks profitable through recessions. Daniel had praised my judgment hundreds of times, apparently only when I was in the room. Dad didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked another question. "What makes you believe that?" Daniel spoke with the smooth confidence that had convinced investors, clients, and eventually me. "The industry is changing. Expansion requires larger developments, outside partnerships, commercial opportunities. And Rachel disagrees. I think she's attached to tradition." Vanessa finally joined in. "She always has been." There it was. Not anger, not jealousy, dismissal. The two people I trusted most had quietly reduced my entire life to one shared opinion. Too sentimental, too predictable, too easy to move aside. Dad's chair creaked. "I built this company on tradition." "Exactly," Daniel replied. "And you built something valuable." His voice lowered. "The question is, who can make it worth twice as much?" I stopped breathing. It had never been about preserving Dad's legacy. It had always been about selling it. The conversation continued for nearly 40 minutes. Every minute stripped away another layer of the marriage I thought I'd lived. Daniel explained development proposals he had already drafted, Vanessa discussed luxury housing projects that could replace the workshop. Neither of them spoke as though they hoped ownership might one day become theirs. They spoke as though it already belonged to them. Then came the sentence I would never forget. "If Rachel inherits everything," Vanessa said quietly, "she'll never sell." Daniel answered without hesitation. "Then we make sure she doesn't keep everything." I pressed pause. The room became painfully quiet. Outside, rain tapped gently against the guest room window. Inside, my entire past rearranged itself. Looking back, I realized something that hurt more than the affair. Daniel had never loved Bennett Millworks. He had loved its value. The company represented 38 acres of land just outside Asheville, prime commercial property. To me, it was my father's life's work. To Daniel, it was a future balance sheet. I closed my eyes. How many dinners had we spent discussing expansion? How many evenings had I thanked him for supporting the family business? How many times had he encouraged me to think bigger? He hadn't been encouraging me. He'd been studying the easiest way in. The next morning, I drove straight to Samuel Price's office. He greeted me before his assistant could announce my arrival. "I thought you might come." "You knew." Samuel removed his glasses. "I suspected. You suspected my husband was trying to steal my father's company?" "I suspected your father believed someone was." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Walter made me promise not to." I stared at him. He wanted evidence before accusations. Samuel motioned toward the conference room. "Sit down." For nearly 2 hours, he explained everything. 3 years earlier, Dad had noticed unusual requests for financial records. At first, he assumed Daniel simply wanted to understand the business. Then documents began disappearing. Copies of trust agreements, property surveys, corporate ownership records. Nothing large enough to attract immediate attention, just enough to build a complete picture. Dad hired a forensic document examiner. 3 signatures had been identified as probable forgeries. Not enough for criminal charges. Enough to convince him someone inside the family couldn't be trusted. "He never wanted to believe it was Daniel," Samuel admitted. "And Vanessa?" Samuel looked toward the window. That realization broke his heart. I looked down at the recorder inside my purse. "He recorded them." Samuel nodded. "I know." "You've heard it?" "No." "He never let you?" "He said if I ever listened before you did, then I might accidentally influence your decisions." Even now. Dad trusted me to reach my own conclusions. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. Samuel slid a thick folder across the table. "There's something else. Inside were incorporation papers, legal filings, trust amendments, ownership certificates. One document carried yesterday's date." "What is this?" "Your father finished restructuring the company 6 months ago." "I know." "No." He leaned forward. "You know part of it." I turned another page. My eyes stopped. Bennett Legacy Foundation. I frowned. This wasn't the company. No. Samuel smiled for the first time. "It's the owner." I looked back at him. "I don't understand." "Neither does Daniel." He folded his hands. "Your father transferred every meaningful asset into a charitable family foundation." I blinked. "The land. Protected. The workshop. Protected. The equipment. Protected. The trademarks. Protected." I turned pages faster. "What about the operating company?" Samuel almost laughed. "It still exists, but it owns almost nothing." My mind finally caught up. Daniel believed he could gain control of Bennett Millworks, even if he somehow managed to obtain the company. The real assets were already gone, protected, untouchable, exactly as Dad had written. They believe the original trust is still valid. It wasn't. Samuel watched realization spread across my face. Your father didn't spend his final months preparing for death. He prepared for war. Samuel gave one quiet nod. And he intended for you to win. That afternoon, I returned to the office for the first time since the funeral. Employees greeted me gently. No one mentioned business. No one asked about the upcoming reading of the will. Everyone simply hugged me. Bennett Millworks had always felt less like a company than an extended family. As I walked through production, I noticed familiar faces. Mike sanding cabinet doors, Linda reviewing invoices, Carlos repairing a finishing sprayer Dad refused to replace. Normal, comforting. Then I saw Vanessa. She wasn't supposed to be there. She stood inside my office speaking with Melissa from accounting. When she noticed me, her smile appeared instantly. "There you are." "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to help." "With accounting?" She laughed. "You've always been suspicious." "Not always, only now." Melissa excused herself almost immediately. Vanessa closed my office door. "I know this week has been awful." "It has. I miss Dad too." "I'm sure you do." She studied my face. "You seem different. Grief changes people." "It does." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I'd begun expecting from everyone involved. "Have you met with Samuel yet?" There it was. "Not." "How are you?" "Not." "Have you been sleeping?" "Not." "Do you need anything?" "Only Samuel. Only the estate. Only what Dad might have left behind." I smiled. "We talked." "And?" "He explained the reading on Friday." "Nothing else?" "No." She searched my eyes, looking for hesitation, fear, knowledge, whatever she hoped to find. I gave her nothing. She finally nodded. "I'm glad." As she reached the door, she hesitated. "Rachel?" "Yes?" "If Daniel starts acting distracted, he's just worried about you." I watched her leave. The concern sounded practiced, almost rehearsed. 5 minutes later, I checked the security cameras. Vanessa hadn't gone home. She walked directly into Daniel's office across town. She'd been there less than 12 minutes after leaving mine. She wasn't checking on her grieving sister. She was delivering a report. And for the first time since Dad's funeral, I realized I wasn't merely uncovering a betrayal. I was standing in the middle of a plan that had been unfolding for years. The only question left was this: how much were they willing to risk before they realized my father had already beaten them? The hardest part wasn't pretending I still trusted them. It was pretending I still needed them. For nearly 3 weeks after my father's funeral, I became the woman Daniel expected me to be. Quiet, distracted, overwhelmed. Every evening I came home exhausted from handling the company. Every morning I apologized for forgetting small things. I even let him believe I was struggling to understand the legal paperwork Samuel kept sending. Whenever I sighed over another stack of documents, Daniel would smile with almost rehearsed sympathy. "You don't have to carry all of this alone." I thanked him every single time. Inside, I was documenting everything, because once you know someone is lying, every conversation becomes evidence. One Thursday evening, Daniel poured us each a glass of wine. He almost never did that. He preferred bourbon. "So," he said casually, "I've been thinking." "I know." He laughed. "You don't even know what I'm going to say. I've been married to you for 17 years. He smiled. "I was thinking maybe it's time to simplify your life." "My life?" "The company." I looked at him. "What about it?" "You've been carrying too much." "I'll manage." "You don't have to." He leaned back comfortably. "I could help." I stayed quiet. "The commercial side? Acquisitions? Negotiations? Expansion?" He spoke slowly, carefully. "As your husband." There it was. Not our company. Not your father's legacy. Expansion, exactly like the recording. I lowered my eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to decide tonight." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm only trying to protect your future." For years, those words would have comforted me. Now they sounded almost identical to a salesman describing an investment opportunity. The next morning, I met Samuel. He had already arranged another meeting, this time with someone my father had trusted for nearly 25 years, Grace Holloway. She was a forensic document examiner. The same woman Dad had secretly hired after discovering forged signatures. Grace spread several documents across the conference table. "The originals," she pointed, "the forged copies." Then another stack. "The signatures are excellent." I frowned. "But not perfect." She smiled. "No one imitates pressure." She placed both pages under a magnifier. "Your father's pen always paused here." She pointed to the curve in the capital W. The forger never knew that. I stared at the tiny difference, barely visible. "Unless you knew where to look." Grace closed the folder. "I can testify under oath." That sentence settled something inside me. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Meanwhile, Daniel became increasingly impatient. He asked about the estate every day. What did Samuel say? When will ownership transfer? Have you signed anything? Did your father leave instructions? Always another question. Never about grief, never about sleep, never about healing. Only paperwork, only timing, only control. Vanessa wasn't much different. She suddenly wanted weekly lunches. She called almost every evening. She offered to organize Dad's office. She volunteered to help sort financial files. I declined every offer politely. Each refusal made her a little more nervous. I could hear it in her voice. The confidence she'd carried for years was beginning to crack. They knew something had changed. They just didn't know what. Then Samuel called. The will reading is Monday. My pulse quickened. Everyone confirmed? Yes. Daniel? Immediately. And Vanessa? Within 5 minutes. Of course they had. Neither wanted to miss the moment they believed their future would begin. Samuel continued. I've arranged everything exactly as Walter requested. Even the recordings? Only if necessary. I looked out my office window toward Dad's workshop. They'll be necessary. Sunday evening, I visited the workshop one final time before the reading. Everything remained exactly as Dad had left it. The drafting table, the coffee stains, the unfinished walnut cabinet resting against the wall. I ran my hand across the worn surface of his workbench. Tomorrow, I whispered, I hope you'd be proud. Behind me, Samuel cleared his throat softly. He had let himself in with his own key. He already was. I smiled. He always believed I could handle this. He believed something else. What? Samuel handed me one last envelope. Walter's handwriting covered the front. Open after the will is read. I laughed quietly. Even now, he planned several moves ahead. Like chess. Samuel smiled. No, he always preferred checkers. I looked at him. Why? Because in checkers, ordinary pieces become kings. Monday morning arrived gray and unusually cold. The conference room at Samuel's office filled slowly. Daniel wore his best navy suit. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later in black silk and pearl earrings Dad had given her years ago. She hugged me tightly. I know today will be hard. It already is. Daniel rested a comforting hand on my shoulder. We'll get through this together. The irony almost made me smile. Samuel entered carrying a leather portfolio. Everyone took their seats. The room became silent. He adjusted his glasses, opened the file, and began reading. My name is Samuel Price. I represent the estate of Walter Bennett. The formal language lasted nearly 20 minutes. Charitable donations, personal belongings, small gifts to longtime employees, scholarships Dad had quietly funded for years. Then Samuel paused. He removed another folder. This section concerns Bennett Millworks. Daniel sat up straighter. Vanessa folded her hands. Neither noticed I wasn't looking at Samuel. I was watching them, waiting. Samuel continued. 6 months prior to his passing, Walter Bennett legally transferred all protected assets into the Bennett Legacy Foundation. Daniel blinked. Once, only once. Samuel kept reading. The foundation exists to preserve the company's history, protect its employees, and prevent liquidation without unanimous approval from its governing board. Daniel's forehead tightened. Vanessa frowned. Samuel turned another page. The governing board consists of... He read 5 names. Mine. Samuel's. Grace Holloway. 2 longtime employees who had worked beside Dad for over 30 years. Daniel's name never came. Neither did Vanessa's. Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Confused. Then Daniel spoke. There must be some mistake. Samuel looked up. There is no mistake. The operating company belongs to Rachel. Correct. So, she controls everything. Samuel folded his hands. No. She protects everything. Daniel's face lost color. What does that mean? It means, Samuel said calmly, the company no longer owns the assets you believed it owned. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel had absolutely no response. He simply stared, trying to understand how the future he'd spent years building had disappeared in less than 60 seconds. Beside him, Vanessa whispered, No. Not angry, not loud, just no, as though refusing reality might somehow rewrite it. Samuel reached for another folder. "There is one additional matter." He looked directly at Daniel. "Before today's meeting, Mrs. Rachel Morgan authorized an independent forensic review of several financial transactions." The room became perfectly still. Grace Holloway stepped through the conference room door carrying 3 binders. Daniel slowly turned toward me. I met his eyes calmly. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see confidence. I saw fear, real fear. And I finally understood something my father had known long before I did. People who build their lives on deception are never truly prepared for the truth, especially when the truth arrives carrying evidence. No one spoke. Grace Holloway quietly placed 3 thick binders on the conference table. The sound echoed through the room louder than it should have. Daniel looked from the binders to me, then to Samuel, finally back to me. "What is this?" Samuel answered before I could. "Evidence." Daniel forced a nervous smile. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "There has," I said calmly, "but not on our side." For the first time since my father's funeral, I spoke directly to him without pretending. His expression changed immediately. The performance disappeared. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Samuel nodded toward Grace. "Please, begin." Grace opened the first binder. Over the last 3 weeks, I examined every financial document submitted by Walter Bennett before his death. She turned a page. I also examined every document that appeared after Daniel Morgan became involved in the company's succession planning. Daniel interrupted. "I don't see what this has to do with me." Grace ignored him. 7 signatures were forged. The room froze. She slid in large photographs across the table. Original signatures. Forged signatures. Pressure analysis, ink comparison, stroke sequencing. Even without technical training, the differences were obvious once she explained them. Daniel looked at them for barely a second, then pushed them away. "I've never seen these before." "No," Grace replied. "You created copies." "Not originals." A long silence followed. Vanessa finally spoke. "This is ridiculous." Grace calmly opened the second binder. It becomes less ridiculous. Inside were hotel invoices, phone records, property searches, corporate emails, every document Dad had collected, every document I had expanded, every document Daniel never imagined still existed. Samuel looked at Daniel. "Would you like to explain why Morgan Development billed Bennett Millworks for consulting services that were never requested?" Daniel hesitated. "We had verbal agreements." Samuel slid another paper forward. "Walter Bennett specifically denied authorizing these invoices." "He forgot." My father remembered every nail he ever purchased. I looked Daniel straight in the eyes. "He didn't forget $400,000. Daniel's jaw tightened. For years he had always known exactly what to say. Today, words failed him. Grace continued. "The invoices were approved using forged authorization signatures." Vanessa suddenly stood. "This is insane." "No," I answered quietly. "This is accounting." She stared at me. I continued. "You always mocked my job. You said I spent my life looking at spreadsheets." I smiled sadly. "The funny thing about spreadsheets, what? They remember everything." Neither of them spoke. Samuel reached into his briefcase. "There remains one final item." The digital recorder. Daniel's face lost what little color remained. "No." Samuel pressed play. Static filled the conference room. Then my father's voice. The recording everyone except me had hoped would never exist. The conversation unfolded exactly as I had heard it. Daniel explaining expansion. Vanessa discussing redevelopment, both speaking about my future as though I were an obstacle instead of a daughter. Then came the sentence. "If Rachel inherits everything." Vanessa's recorded voice filled the room. "She'll never sell." Daniel answered. "Then we make sure she doesn't keep everything." No one moved. No one breathed. Even the air felt heavy. The recording ended. Silence followed. Long, painful, complete. Daniel finally whispered, "That conversation isn't what it sounds like." I almost pitied him. Almost. What exactly does it sound like? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out, because there was nothing left to invent. Vanessa began crying. Real tears this time. Not graceful. Not controlled. I never wanted this. I looked at her. You had 3 years to stop it. She covered her face. I loved him. The words surprised everyone, including Daniel. The room turned toward her. She looked at the floor. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt strangely calm. The affair hurt, but hearing her admit it somehow hurt less than all the lies. When? I asked. She answered without looking at me. Almost 4 years. 4 years, 4 Christmases, 4 birthdays, 4 Thanksgiving dinners, 4 years of photographs where we all smiled together. Daniel finally spoke. Vanessa, no. She stepped away from him. I'm done lying. She looked at me with swollen eyes. It started after one of your business conferences. He said you barely noticed him anymore. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. I was taking care of Dad. She nodded. I know. You drove me to the airport. I know. You hugged me goodbye. I know. Every answer broke something else. Daniel reached toward her. She stepped back. He looked at me. I made mistakes. Mistakes? You had an affair with my sister. Silence. You forged documents. Silence. You tried to steal my father's company. Silence. You planned our future while planning my replacement. He lowered his head. I never stopped loving you. That sentence hurt more than anything else he had said. Not because I believed it, because I realized he probably did, in his own selfish way. He loved me. He simply loved control more. He loved money more. He loved winning more. Love had never been enough to stop him. The conference room door opened quietly. Margaret, Daniel's mother. She looked older than I remembered, smaller. She held a folded envelope in trembling hands. I'm sorry I'm late. Daniel frowned. Mom? She ignored him. Instead, she walked directly toward me. I owe you the truth. Daniel stood. You don't need to do this. Yes. She turned toward her son. I do. She looked back at me. I found out 6 months ago. My stomach tightened. The affair? She nodded. I confronted Daniel. I remained silent. He promised he would end it. Daniel closed his eyes. Margaret continued. When Walter changed the trust, she swallowed. Daniel became desperate. She handed Samuel the envelope. I wrote everything down. Inside were handwritten notes, dates, conversations, bank meetings. The night Daniel admitted he expected the inheritance to solve his financial problems. Samuel read silently, then looked up. This confirms several timelines. Margaret finally faced her son. I raised you to work for what you wanted. Tears rolled down her face. Not to steal someone else's life. Daniel couldn't even look at her. I tried to protect you, he whispered. No. She shook her head. You tried to protect yourself. She turned back toward me. I chose the wrong person. I kept hoping he'd become the man his father was. She smiled sadly. I should have believed the woman standing in front of me instead. Without thinking, I hugged her. She broke down completely, not because her son had been exposed, because she had finally stopped defending him. The divorce took less than 4 months. Daniel didn't contest it. He couldn't. Every financial claim collapsed under the weight of documented fraud. State investigators eventually opened their own inquiry into the forged corporate documents. Morgan Development lost nearly every major client before the investigation even finished. Reputation, I learned, disappears much faster than it is built. Vanessa left Asheville shortly afterward. She sold her condominium, closed her event business. No one seemed to know where she moved. For a long time, I wondered whether I hated her. Eventually, I realized something surprising. I didn't. Hatred would have kept her connected to my life. Indifference finally set me free. One evening, several months later, I returned alone to Dad's workshop. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows exactly as it had hundreds of times before. His unfinished walnut cabinet still stood against the wall. I ran my hand across its smooth surface. For the first time since his death. The room no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. On the workbench rested the last unopened envelope Dad had left me, the one marked, "Open after the will is read." I carefully unfolded the letter. My father's familiar handwriting filled the page. Before I read the first sentence, I already felt him beside me. And somehow, I knew the final lesson he had spent years preparing would have nothing to do with money. It would be about the kind of life worth building after betrayal. For several minutes, I simply held the letter. The workshop was quiet, except for the familiar ticking of the old wall clock Dad had refused to replace, because, as he always said, if it still tells the truth, it still has value. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. Outside, late autumn sunlight filtered through the maple trees, filling the workshop with warm strips of gold that settled across the workbench where he'd spent most of his life creating things meant to outlast him. I unfolded the letter carefully. Rachel, if you're reading this, then two things are true. First, I'm gone. Second, you survived. Not because you were stronger than everyone else, because you finally became strong enough to trust yourself. If everything happened the way I feared, then you've probably spent weeks asking why I didn't tell you sooner. The answer is simple. You wouldn't have believed me. You loved with your whole heart. I never wanted that to become something you regretted. Kindness is not weakness. Trust is not foolishness. The mistake isn't loving people. The mistake is refusing to believe them when they show you who they truly are. I couldn't protect you forever. So I tried to leave you something better than protection. I tried to leave you wisdom. The company was never my greatest achievement. The buildings aren't. The machines aren't. The land isn't. You are. Everything I built was only meant to create a life where my daughters never had to choose between honesty and success. I failed one of you. And for that, I will always be sorry. Don't spend your life punishing Vanessa. Life will do a better job than you ever could. If she ever truly changes, forgive her. Not because she deserves it, because you deserve peace. One more thing. The unfinished walnut cabinet in the corner isn't unfinished by accident. I stopped working on it because I wanted someone else to complete it. If you've reached this letter, that someone is you. Build something beautiful. Love, Dad. By the time I reached the final line, I couldn't see the page anymore. Not because I was broken, because I finally understood what he'd spent his last months trying to teach me. He hadn't protected a company, he had protected my future. And now, it belonged to me. The divorce became final 4 months later. I walked out of the courthouse carrying nothing except my purse and a thin folder of legal documents. No dramatic speeches, no celebration, no anger. Daniel stood across the parking lot speaking quietly with his attorney. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He looked older than 46. His confidence had disappeared. So had the expensive suits, the polished certainty. The man standing there wasn't the husband I'd married, nor was he the successful businessman everyone admired. He was simply someone who had confused winning with living. He took one hesitant step toward me. Rachel, I waited. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't matter anymore. No, I answered honestly. It doesn't. He nodded slowly. I did love you. I believed him. Strangely, that no longer changed anything. I know. He looked surprised. I also know, I continued, that you loved what you wanted more. Neither of us spoke again. There was nothing left worth arguing about. I wished him well, not because he'd earned it, because I no longer wanted to carry him with me. Then I walked away. I never looked back. 6 months later, Bennett Millworks felt alive again. Not because business had suddenly become easy, because the fear had finally left. The employees smiled more. The workshop echoed with laughter again. Every Friday afternoon, we still stopped work 15 minutes early, just as Dad always insisted, to share coffee together. His old office became a small museum celebrating the company's history. Customers often paused to read the photographs lining the hallway. Many of them had known Dad personally. Some left flowers. Others left handwritten notes. One simply read, "Thank you for building things that lasted." That became our unofficial company motto. Not furniture, not buildings, lives. One Saturday morning, I finally carried the unfinished walnut cabinet onto Dad's workbench. I wasn't alone. Mike came first, then Carlos, then Linda. None of them said much. They simply picked up their tools. We figured, Mike smiled, Walter wouldn't mind a little help. Over the next several weekends, we finished it together. Not exactly the way Dad would have, but close enough that I think he would have smiled. Inside the top drawer, I placed his last letter. Not where customers could find it, where future generations of our family eventually might. Some lessons deserve to be discovered, not displayed. Nearly a year passed before I heard from Vanessa. The envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a single handwritten page. Rachel, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to answer. I've spent almost a year trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting the person who loved me most. The truth is ugly. I spent so much of my life believing you were the favorite that I stopped noticing how often you sacrificed for everyone else. I confused responsibility with privilege. I confused jealousy with justice. None of that excuses what I did. I'm finally in therapy. For the first time in my life, I'm trying to become someone Dad wouldn't be ashamed of. Whether I succeed isn't your responsibility. I only wanted you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed. I'm sorry. Vanessa. I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it inside a drawer. Not because I wanted to forget it, because I no longer needed to carry it every day. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single decision. It's a direction, and I had finally started walking toward it. Every Sunday morning, I still unlock Dad's workshop. The smell of cedar is still there. The old radio still only catches 3 stations. His favorite coffee mug still sits on the shelf above the workbench. Sometimes I build something. Sometimes I simply sit in the silence. People often ask whether I regret everything that happened, whether I'd rather have never discovered the truth. My answer always surprises them. No, because the truth didn't destroy my life. It revealed it. The people who truly loved me stayed. The people who loved what I could give them eventually left. Painful as that was, it made room for something far better. Peace. My father used to say that anything worth keeping should be built to survive pressure. For years, I thought he was talking about wood. Now I know he was talking about character. Homes can be rebuilt, businesses can recover, money comes and goes, but integrity. Integrity is the one inheritance no one can steal. And if my father left me anything truly valuable, it wasn't the company, it wasn't the land, it wasn't even the legacy. It was the courage to choose honesty over comfort, truth over illusion, and peace over revenge. That is the inheritance I protect now, every single day. The end.